6:30 on Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. This is a resumption of our board meeting. We actually convened a little early today at 4:45, where the board participated in a study session to better understand school finance. That session was presented to us by subject matter expert Mary Camerzell, which was wonderful. She did an amazing job, of course. It was great to have her back in the building. That session was also recorded and is available for viewing if anybody is interested. So we took a brief recess in between the end of the study session and the start of this meeting, which now convenes our regularly scheduled board meeting. So once again, I want to welcome those of you who are attending here in our boardroom in person and those of you who may be watching online. And so with that, I would ask that everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our next item on the agenda is the rules of order for governing board meetings. And before I read those rules of order, I just want to mention, for those of you who may have joined us either in person, online, or viewed the our last board meeting sometime in between, we had a lot of activity in the beginning of our board meeting because we had to elect president, vice president positions, and in all of that hullabaloo, Eileen Jackson, who was the president at the time, now the vice president, feels that she neglected to properly introduce our new board members who joined us for the first time 2 weeks ago. So at this time, I would like to formally welcome Jacqueline Davily and Tom Loeb joining us as our newly elected school board members. We're delighted to have you. You've already dove in with 2 feet, and we appreciate you being here and all that we look forward to hearing your questions, comments, and having your participation in all things CFSD. So thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, the exciting rules of order. On behalf of the governing board, I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. Members of the public are attending both in person and remotely through YouTube Live. In a few minutes, I'll read the rules of order for public comment at governing board meetings. If you wish to make a public comment remotely, you should have signed up using the Google form that's available under the YouTube Live description. If you do not see the link to the Google form to speak, you can refresh the YouTube live stream. If you're attending in person, the purple form, request to address the governing board, is available in the table at the back of the room. It looks like this. I haven't received any yet. If you do wish to make a public comment, please fill out the form and hand it to our board secretary, Amy Sams. If there is a public hearing during the meeting and you wish to make a comment during the hearing, you can sign up. There's not a public meeting tonight, so probably didn't need to read that. The governing board welcomes public comments at its meetings by providing 2 opportunities for the public to address the board. If your topic of interest is not on the agenda, you may address the board during the public comments time slot near the beginning of the meeting, or if the topic is on the agenda, you may speak just prior to discussion of that agenda topic. In the event there's a public hearing, which there's not, then we reopen the time to speak. If you're joining remotely and wish to make a public comment, as I said, you should have already submitted your Google form provided with the YouTube link. And for those attending in person, you need to fill out this purple form. Speakers will be called upon when it is your turn to address the board. For those attending remotely, you may choose to enable your camera. As a reminder to remote attendees who wish to speak, please unmute your microphone when called upon. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to address the board. The sound of a buzzer indicates the end of your 3 minutes. In the event of a large number of speakers, the board may need to limit that time so that they can conduct the business on this agenda. By law, the board cannot discuss, consider, or vote on topics that are not on the agenda. This assures the community that they are aware of the topics that will be discussed tonight. If you wish to discuss a topic through written communication, board members' contact information can be found on the district's website. We appreciate the community's attendance and comments at this meeting. So, before we get to our public comments section, and therefore give another few minutes for anyone wanting to speak remotely to submit their form, we will move on to what many will consider the highlight of this evening, which is item 3.4, our super volunteer recognition. Our super volunteer this evening, the board is honoring super volunteer Jody Ponzo, and Tom Loeb will be doing the presentation on behalf of the board. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. So I go over to that podium.
Yes. Yeah, go over there.
I am so excited that one of my first official board duties is to recognize a super volunteer. And not just any super volunteer, but one that I've had the privilege of observing and watching in action as the FFO president at the high school. Jody Ponzo is the president of the Catalina Foothills High School Family Faculty Organization. And trust me when I tell you that is a lot. That is running FFO meetings. It's running executive board FFO meetings. It's going to monthly district FFO meetings. It's leading a team of about a dozen parents who are involved, volunteers, committee chairs, the executive board members. It's corralling dozens of volunteers for events throughout the year. It's overseeing Fall Fling, the big welcome back in the fall for students, and planning Grad Night, the big all-night event for seniors. And it's basically living on campus. It's probably your forwarding address. Between everything I just listed to staff appreciation lunches, grading day activities, representing the FFO during day hours, during evening hours at school events, selling merch on the side out of your trunk. It's brainstorming fundraising opportunities, and it's looking to the future and figuring out who the next generation of FFO leaders is going to be. It's all of that and more, and I personally recognize every bit of that effort. So I chatted some with Jody in advance of this and just got a little bit of background that I wanted to share. When Jody moved here in 2020 with her family, she did so with a spirit of volunteering already deeply ingrained in her from her involvement with her children's schools in California. She also brought a deep understanding and appreciation for the importance of education and the complexity of education, both with her parents being educators and because Jody herself was a middle school administrator. So she's got a lot of different perspectives that she brings here. She immediately stepped into the secretary role with the FFO during the pandemic. Not exactly the easiest time to find one's place in a new community. And then as the world returned to some semblance of normalcy, Jody became even more involved. Site council, grad night committee, theater booster club, staff appreciation, FFO president. Amazing. And it's been a labor of love for Jody. That was clear in speaking with her, in part because of her enthusiasm for Catalina Foothills High School and how her own sons, one a recent graduate, the other a sophomore, both here tonight, have benefited from their experiences at the high school. That's part of it, but it's also because of the relationships that she's built during her time on the FFO. When I asked Jody to tell me her favorite thing about her role, she did not hesitate. Her immediate answer was the executive board. followed by the principal. She proudly told me, she proudly told me about the spirit of camaraderie they share, about their ability to get things done and have fun in the process. Incidentally, I'm sure Jody will be happy to know that the feeling is mutual. I did my fact checking and reached out to some of the FFO officers, and I heard the same from them. They complimented Jody's leadership, her level-headed decision-making, her diplomacy, energy, creativity, her humor, and her selflessness. Jody, on behalf of the Catalina Foothills School District Governing Board, it is an honor and a privilege to celebrate your dedication to the district, to the high school, and to all of us who benefit from your tireless efforts. I am pleased to recognize you as a CFSD Super Volunteer. Principal Lambert, would you like to add anything?
It's always dangerous when you don't prepare remarks ahead of time, but I did write a nice letter, and I know that got sent to the board, and I hope everyone read it, and I know you read it as well. So I won't read it out loud, but I did want to thank you personally for what you've done for me as I'm in my first year in this role. It was so nice to have somebody come in with experience and understanding education, and your humor and your energy, your joy of life has made my first year a lot easier than it could have been. So thank you. I'm really proud to have you with us. Miss you, but you're not going anywhere because you got your kid right here for 2 more years. So thank you, Jody. Appreciate you.
So Jody, if you will come up and receive this certificate celebrating you as a super volunteer. And this token of our appreciation.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
We're going to make sure you take a photo.
Oh.
It could be the.
Where's the good lighting? We're going to do 2.
One here.
6 feet tall. So
I can help with that.
And Dr. Lambert, you can join. You can join this.
Yeah.
And you can get up and family can take.
Yes, you can take pictures.
Yes, where we are celebrating excellent science industry. Are they going to let that happen?
Familia?
Thank you so much, Jody, and the entire Ponzo family. We appreciate you taking your time to be here tonight, Dr. Lambert. We'd love you to stay for any and all of the remaining meeting minutes, but we certainly understand if you have you are at the end of a busy day and have dinner, homework, and other things that you need to attend to. We will not be offended if you scoot out. Now we're all looking at you to see if you're going to scoot out.
I don't think we have any public comment tonight.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll go on with the next item on our agenda, which is public comments. I did not receive a purple form from anyone in the audience. I do not see that anybody is online. Is that correct, Ryan? We're not seeing anybody? Okay. No public comments this evening. Then we move on to our consent agenda. Board members, is there any item on the consent agenda that should be pulled for further discussion? Okay. If there's no items that need to be pulled so that they can be discussed further, then consistent with our custom and practice, our vice president makes a consent motion.
Okay. I move that the governing board approve consent agenda items 5.1, the governing board January 14th, 2025 regular meeting minutes as presented. 5.2, the governing board January 14th, 2025 executive session meeting minutes as presented. 5.3, the expense voucher memorandum as presented. 5.4, the field trip request memorandum as presented. 5.5, the fundraising request memorandum as presented. 5.6, the personnel memorandum as presented. 5.7, the acceptance with gratitude of the gifts and donations memorandum as presented. And 5.8, the Educational Technology Consortium Cooperative Purchasing Agreement with the Northern Arizona University as presented.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We'll give that one to Gina. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. And Tom, thank you for the presentation. That was lovely.
That's great.
Made it easy.
Now you got your feet wet. Nothing is off limits. Okay. We now move into our unfinished business. For this evening, we do have a couple of action items on the calendar. The first item for action is 6.1, approval of revisions to policy K1 and and regulation KI-R, visitors to schools. Dr. Bartlett.
I'm going to start by saying there were a couple of things that we're going to add in here. So we're probably going to have to do something as amended, because there's a couple of corrections that need to be made to this policy. But after the first reading on January 14th, we did make some revisions. The legal reference, which is one of the things we need to change, I've referenced it as 31-3101, but it should be 13-3101. And it was added as that defines the weapons. And then the legal reference 13-1302 was revised to provide the accurate reference of, again, we needed 13-3102. So those are two changes that we need to amend there. So we've added the legal references to the policy. The only other change was visitation in that policy, the first paragraph, that we established policy procedures for visitation, not control. And then the new adoption date was added for January 28th, if you so adopt tonight. When we move on to the regulation, again, there's going to be, there was a change recommended that we add the legal term, legal guardian, after each reference to parents. And I indicated that there were 3, but in that very first paragraph, the first sentence, parents and then legal guardians are encouraged to visit the schools, and visitors other than parents / legal guardians need to be added as well. But there were 5, so there is a total of 5 times that we're going to add that reference. So that's the other amendment. But the language here that was important was we were adding this private service providers, and what we will expect of private service providers, or not expect them to be on campus providing their services during our school days, so that we protect our instructional minutes, and then we don't have to supervise the delivery of those services as well. But it does not apply to law enforcement personnel, child protective services, caseworkers, or visitors invited by the teacher or the school personnel. So those are the changes to our visitors to schools policy and regulation.
Thank you. Questions about those changes that were in writing, and also the additions that were, or substitutions that were recommended this evening? There's no further discussion. May I have a motion?
I'm happy to make a motion. I move the governing board approve the revisions as amended to policy KI and regulation KI-R, visitors to school, again as amended and present.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve 6.1. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
As amended.
As amended. Did I say presented?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
As
Thank you.
amended.
As amended.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 5-0. Item 6.2. Again, this is an action item. Oops, why am I on 5.2? Sorry, hang on.
Actually, in the board book, it's 5.8.
Yeah, it's misnumbered.
Yeah, why does
And
it
it's
say that?
misnumbered in the board book, but on the agenda at 6:62.
Oh, I'm so confused.
Yeah.
You're in the
Okay,
right place then.
okay, I was in the right place. Shouldn't have doubted myself. Okay, item 6.1 is an action item for this evening. It requests approval to revisions to the high school course and programs for 2025, 2026. It is presented to us by Cheryl Castro, Executive Director of Curriculum and Assessment, so I shall turn it over to you.
Thank you. You'll recall we had some discussion in the first reading, and so we've made some changes, which you probably also read through, so I'll skim over those. If you have questions, stop me. Otherwise, my plan is to go from one section to the next, but I'll keep looking up to see.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with the academic awards. We talked at the last meeting about how the academic awards for the Silver and Gold Award would be based on the first and second semester of the same academic year to eliminate some confusion that was around that. That would also give our freshmen the opportunity to be recognized for their academic achievement in first semester, which wasn't the case prior. And our seniors are still having the cumulative GPA of 3.75 or better. You asked last time we met about how these changes will be communicated to families and students, and the eligibility criteria for this award are always included in the course guide in both English and Spanish every year, and so that statement about how this has changed is there. Parents will also be notified through a Parent Square post this summer. Eligible students will receive award letters that delineate the award criteria, and probably most importantly, because it happens a lot, counselors are going to be reminding students about this recognition when they meet individually and in small and large groups over the course of the school year. No other changes were made to this section.
May I ask a question? So just say, I think this summer is too late for that communication because parents will be expecting to hear the spring at normal time. So just to try to get out ahead of that.
Well, I believe this year we're still going to have the
This year,
awards
This year, we're still going with what we had before.
Oh.
This is for the
Yes.
25-26 school year.
Yes,
Oh,
yes. So
Yeah.
this
you're
year
setting me straight there.
it's going to be the same.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to social studies, at the first reading, you requested that the prerequisite letter grade and the corresponding rubric grade be included in the prereq section of the course descriptions. That change was made in all areas of the course guide. And then I also wanted to let you know that in the preliminary pages of the course guide, there's a correlation chart that appears every single year that shows students what the letter grade and the rubric score parameters are. And so that appears every single year. As a result of your inquiries about the flexibility surrounding the prerequisites, you're probably excited about this one. I was, and Dr. Lambert was as well. The team added the statement in red below on page 55 to the course guide so that the existing yet previously yet unpublished, the practice of waiving prerequisites when appropriate is explicitly communicated to families and to students. And so you'll see that language at the bottom of the page. That was a really good change. Also, in light of the change made above, the high school team decided to remove mention of grade thresholds as prereqs and changed it to recommendations. So the language that we talked about last time for prereqs has moved down to a line that says recommended. There was a question about prereqs for science and math. The high school team reported that this change wasn't needed because the skills acquired in previous science and math courses don't necessarily translate directly to the skills needed to be successful in AP Psych and AP Microeconomics, but there is a more direct correlation to students' past performance and their projected performance in a course of this type. And so their goal is to communicate to students that if they've earned a B or a 2.45 or better in the prereq courses, they're likely to be successful in AP Psych or AP Microeconomics. So with that in mind, there were no additional prereqs listed for any of the social studies AP courses listed below on page 56.
Thank you for that update. I appreciate
It was a good conversation and it resulted in some good changes, so thank you for that. CTE, at the first reading, you asked if the reduced fee for digital photography 1, 2, and 3 would have an impact on the fees that students need to pay for certification. I told you that I was fairly certain that there was no impact to that because CTE covers the cost of certifications. I double-checked that with Carrie Burson, and she told me that's correct, that it's not going to have any impact. You also were wondering about graphic design publication, opening that to students in 912, and if that would result in any wait lists or any deciding who gets to join the class. Carrie Burson and her team talked with me. She said since the course has suffered recently from very low enrollment to the point that currently it's offered as a combined section, which Gina mentioned before, with with graphic design, the high school team believes that there will not be a need for a waiting list for students in grades 9 to 12. And the goal is for graphic design to once again be a standalone class with multiple sections, hopefully, that is taught by 2 instructors who have traditionally been assigned to this class, and that will grow our students from freshman year on so that she can keep the yearbook staffed.
Can I ask you a question before you move on? I hesitate to ask this, but it's about funding for freshmen for CTE. I thought there was a time when we did not get CTE funding for freshmen. Does that affect,
I don't think that CTE does the full funding for the graphic design position. I think M&O contributes to that.
Okay.
So for that reason, we can have freshmen in there.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then at the first reading, a request was made to add the $40 vendor fee to each course instead of putting a note at the bottom. Mm-hmm. So we added that as a fee, and you'll see that verbiage listed in red. It's the same verbiage as was stated previously. It's just it appears in the fee section of the course guide on that. And moving on to world languages. Here we go. So we talked about the rationale for facilitating our high school students' participation in travel abroad opportunities. And the format and the goals of the program were discussed. We wondered at one point if we should even be doing this. Mm-hmm. So I met with the team. I'm going to use the word passionate. They were passionately supportive of both programs. One of them pointed to the wall behind, we were on a Google Meet, and said, "Our transfer goals?" And just pointed out our transfer goals, which I listed for you on pages 58 and 59. These are the things that we want students to be doing after they leave our classroom. And the trips that we've put in the course guide are ones where students can really exercise and develop those transfer goals. So they told me to use the word firmly believe, so I am. Firmly believe that both travel opportunities benefit students who choose to participate. They also mentioned it to them. They know that the participation level is low as compared to prior years when we had a large group of students going every year. They said for them, it doesn't matter if it's 1 student or 100 students, they want to keep offering this so that they can hone their intercultural competence skills in ways that typically cannot be achieved in a traditional classroom, even one that's communicatively based and proficiency oriented. So they believe these types of opportunities have a profound and transformative impact on students' understandings of themselves, others, and their world. And so offering the programs as a foundational component of our comprehensive world language program. They intend to keep offering both travel abroad experiences for our students. Nothing else that was under world languages on pages 59 through 61 was changed. On page 62, I just wanted to let you know I did add a link to the Amigos de las Americas because we decided not to put the fees in because they vary so much by how long the program is, where the students are going. And so the link, you can click on fees and funding, and it tells, like right now, if you go on it tonight, you'll see that the lowest fee is $3,875 for 6 weeks in Paraguay, and the only reason that's a cheaper one for 6 weeks is that there was a donor who's funding part of the travel fees for that one, to a high fee of $5,275 for Costa Rica, 3 weeks in Costa Rica. We decided not to post those amounts because they're readily available on the website and they change based on fluctuating costs for travel. We did make another change that we didn't discuss last time we met. We had originally put students in grades 10 through 12 because we knew we were talking about rising 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, but it occurred to us as we were discussing it that some people might not know that that means rising 10th, 11th. So we changed the language there to read students may participate in the summer after completing 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. We thought that was much more clear. Same for the Chinese. On page 63, the summer experience abroad for Chinese, We made the change about 9th, 10th, and 11th grade after that summer of that year, and we didn't put the fees there either, although when I researched it, it can vary between $3,000 to $6,000 plus, depending on where you go, how long you stay, what type of hotel you're in, and what type of additional excursions you choose.
And that would be determined through an informational meeting?
Yes.
They would be communicated with an
Right, to
information. They
decide-
have to attend an informational meeting?
Yes, they have to attend an informational meeting at the beginning of the year. That's when the trip is selected, and then participants have input, at least the last time we've done it, participants have input whether they want to make it a bigger trip or a smaller trip. They all have to come to consensus, of course. So far, that hasn't been a problem, so.
When's the last time we had a trip?
2019.
So with regards to the China one, am I understanding this correctly? Apologies if you covered this last time. Am I understanding this correctly that the student does not have to be taking Chinese as a class? It could be, for example, it could be any of our students.
Any student could go on. In fact, we have had students in the past. I think the year it was Scott Olmsted who was the chaperone, we had a student who had no background in Chinese at all.
Okay.
They were just interested in learning more about China,
Okay.
and seeing China.
Which is why there's not a credit available versus the Spanish.
Yeah, well, and also it's not that they're necessarily staying there long enough to
Right,
work on
exactly.
language skills, are they? I understand the credit situation, I think, although, I don't know, I mean, arguably, is that something that there should be consideration for half a credit if it's more of like a cultural presentation that they come back and give or some such thing, or is that not relevant at all?
Well, it's really about the language.
So intercultural communicative competence is two things. It's, think of two Venn diagrams. One is how much language do I know? And one is how do I interact with people? What do I know? So you might have somebody in that intersection who knows a lot about China and how to interact, how to give and receive business cards, for example, how not to offend someone when you walk into their home when they've invited you as a guest, but they might not have any language. We are looking to develop in our program both of those things, the linguistic competence and the cultural understanding. And so it would be, we've talked about in our meeting how we would assess that beyond a report that could be gotten from, I mean, we could do a student reflection, but this is a different kind of trip. People do come back changed from it. People who went with Scott Olmsted, they all had student reflections that they wrote at the end, talked about what they learned, what they were surprised by, what they expected, and how it was different than what they lived while they were there. But for the length of that program, which could be anywhere from 10 days to 15 days, I can't imagine it being any longer than that because it gets cost prohibitive. The team thinks maybe no credit for that one for now.
Well, I appreciate you coming, speaking with your team and then providing an explanation to us. I can speak only for myself, of course, but I'm satisfied. I understand why they feel so passionately. I mean, as somebody who's like, I work really hard to use my passport whenever I can.
We should write that into the curriculum. Let's please work so hard as we can to use our passports.
I do have an appreciation of the value of travel, and I can see the educational value and the tie to the curriculum and our mission and our values. So, personally, I'm satisfied. After having questions 2 weeks ago, I'm satisfied.
Thank you.
I am satisfied but still have questions. And to preface this, I was a foreign language major in college.
World language major. Sorry.
Yes, thank you for that. Back then, it was different.
I know. We know more now.
And did 2 high school exchange programs and 1 in college, and can speak to how motivating and life-changing those are. I am curious, and I suspect some of this was covered previously as well, but district financial obligations and district potential liability are either, or is there anything around either of those?
For the China trip, it's a professional company, and you do have to sign liability waivers. Anytime you travel with a student-led trip like that, you sign waivers. With Amigos, there are also waivers you have to sign, but there is no district liability for either one of those programs. that's why we chose Amigo specifically, because we know the people who are running it, we know the impact. We had a lot of kids who used to go to that
Well,
back in
Amigos
the
is a
day.
national organization as well, and they have incredibly high standards. And those students, before they leave the country, have gone through 12 weeks of, I remember there was a night during the school week, and then on the weekend, they just went and got trained for hours before they were allowed to get on a plane, on how to be in your country and what to do and what not to do. And it's a national program with highly regulated standards. So I'm pretty sure that covers us. I mean, not being an attorney, but they're going with a very professional organization.
And then are all fees and expenses covered by students and families?
Yes.
Okay.
And with the Amigos program, as you mentioned last time we met, there's a fundraising component. All the students that I know who ever went, they were able to raise enough funds to defray costs to a place where their family could afford it.
They make you write letters to 100 of your closest friends and relatives.
And then the money's in a pot, and so it's divvied out.
I have two follow-up questions, actually, Tom. Thank you for bringing those points up. Coming back to liability, are we sure that we don't have any exposure? If we're putting this into our course guide, is that a de facto recommendation?
Well, when we do, the trust does cover our teacher when we go, and anything that happened, I'm trying to think the last time we went to China, we had to notify the trust that we were going.
But if something were to happen to a student, and we've recommended the course, as evidenced by the fact that we put it into our course guide, are we totally relieved of any liability in that situation?
Well, our students are covered under our insurance policies, right? So if they are a student, although that did come up, I mean, are these outgoing 12th graders or just incoming 12th?
We can't, that's the reason we clarified that it's
Yeah.
Okay, so if
rising.
they're a student, then they're covered under our
Even
insurance
if they're
policy.
in China or
Yes,
Guatemala
yes,
or?
because they are still a registered student. If they've graduated, they're not covered, which is why we've had to take 12th graders off of travel trips. The graduating 12th graders, remember that?
Controversy?
Well, yeah,
Yes.
me too.
Yes.
Speech and
So they
debate.
are covered as as students through our liability insurance with the trust.
And so if something were to happen, heaven forbid, to a student on a trip, we're comfortable that we have no exposure there.
Yes.
And then in terms of fees, the follow-up question to that one. Thoughts on accessibility of these courses? So we offer, we always ask for wording to be added for field trips, for example, that if somebody needs if a family needs financial assistance, that they should reach out, and we have, we have ways of helping to cover that or to offset. Do we have any obligation to do the same here?
No, because this is an optional trip outside of the school year, correct? So, I mean, I get band is also, but it's not an obligation that we cover any of those fees or make it accessible to. Now, we could help them with fundraising or something like that, but we're not obligated to provide funding.
The way I read this description of the potential summer experience abroad for Chinese is that it would require a group of students with their families to get together to jointly select a tour company, an itinerary, a cost. So to my thinking, it's kind of an outsourced. I understand your point that it's in our guide, because we would have a teacher chaperone and who would tie it to our learning goals and that sort of thing. But I don't see, it's because it's kind of outsourced to a professional tour agency. I think in the planning stage, that's when they would ask those questions about liability. And my guess is that, I mean, I'm guessing, but you can tell me that I assume whatever is selected will have to be approved, and I assume at that point you would ask those kinds of questions to ensure that whatever is being whatever company is being investigated would also meet whatever standards we would expect in terms of liability, the types of things that
For
you're
the
talking
trust
about.
as well. Yeah, the
Insurance
trust.
company, that
The
sort of
trust
thing.
has-
I don't know that it's something, doesn't seem to me that's something that we would need to be concerned about now, knowing that that's kind of a usual
Right.
box to check before anything is approved. I think to me, this just lets parents know that if there is an interest, this can be pursued.
One final question from me. It mentions CFSD staff chaperoning the experience. Does the district subsidize or cover travel costs or other expenses for staff members chaperoning?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, this is an action item for this evening, and I would ask if anyone would like to make a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move the governing board approve the high school course/program revisions for the academic awards, social studies, career and technical education, and world languages programs for implementation in the 2025-26 school year as presented.
Thank you, Tom. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castro.
Petition.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is under our discussion and reports. And this evening, we will be hearing from, I know it's Justin Robinson. I just want to get,
Oh, his title. The title, his title?
yeah, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it. It's just my second meeting. I haven't done this in a long time.
It's a long title.
I know.
Very impressive.
Justin Robinson, Coordinator of Student Data Assessment and Accountability. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's not your first rodeo. You were here a few months ago talking to us about the 8th REF accountability system. And so we appreciate your time. And this evening we are here to discuss, well, student data assessment and accountability.
Yes, thank you for having me back.
You're welcome.
Oops, sorry, I am splitting screens. Let's change one thing here.
Would you like me to move over to one side or the other so you
Oh,
don't
no,
have to
that's
look
fine.
behind me? Okay.
Perfect, there we go. Okay, yeah, so let's talk about assessment. You have a copy of the assessment report. However, I will be displaying lots of the tables that are in the report on the screen as well. It'll also show the page number where that is found in your report as well if you need to kind of jump back and forth to follow along as we go through it. Okay, so a couple of clarifications before we get into this report. Right at the beginning, we do have to kind of clarify what data is not in this report. Basically to protect student anonymity in things like this, we're publishing a lot of data. Very, very small subgroups we do not report out on. And you can see on page 3, it talks about that we have, or not page 3, another page, but we don't have any data for homeless and foster students, American Indian, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, because we don't have enough students in those populations district-wide to share any of that data. Additionally, and this is following in line with the Arizona Department of Education's reporting as well, if an entire subgroup performs the same, we can't report that data either because that would remove the anonymity. So if all left-handers were proficient, and I said all left-handers are proficient, anyone you know who's left-handed you would know is proficient. Therefore, you've lost the anonymity in that case. So you might see cases where a group says that they, greater than some percent performed here. That's because we're just saying any range between, it might be 90 to 100 or 93% to 100. Any that fall in that range, we're just going to say is greater than or less than a certain amount. it gives you a range of values, but it doesn't tell you much beyond that. So to start off this report, we're going to be looking at the state achievement assessments. These, of course, feed directly into that A through F accountability system, a large portion of that. Most of this report focuses on proficiency, which was 20% for both the K model and the 912 model, as we discussed previously. And here are the assessments that kind of go into that and what grade levels those cover. So to start off, it's just a small quick table showing our participation rates for last year, spring 2024, in terms of the AASA assessment and the ACT. So it's showing the participation rates for those. Participation rates for AZ-Sci and Aspire were also above 95%. That the exact numbers aren't given to us for those, but we know they met the requirements because we earned the bonus points for those requirements as we discussed previously. So our numbers are good here. So as discussed, we're talking about different performance levels and proficiency for this report. For most of the state achievement assessments, we're looking at the percent of students passing, and so that constitutes students who are proficient and highly proficient. But we've also added into the report for ASA some information about growth, since we do have data on that as well. And of course, you'll remember that that is for at least the K model, that's 50% of their letter grade is growth data. And so that's why that's kind of being included in here, and we have 3 years of that data to work with. We do not have any growth data for the high school level. We have growth data for last year, but we don't have 3 years of continuous data for that because we just, with the kind of revision of what assessments we offered, there's a gap in there of that growth data. So to start off, we'll be looking at AASA ELA, so the English Language Arts, passing rates for our grades 3 through 8. So on the screen here, you can see kind of what those rates are. You'll notice at the bottom, and this is true throughout the report, you were given a passing percentage for these different subgroups, but also a number in parentheses. That number is the number of students in that subgroup who did pass, not the number of students in the subgroup as a whole. So you can kind of gain from that the size of the subgroup at least a little bit to know which subgroups are large, which are small, etc. So to kind of start off with each of these, I'm going to go over a couple of sub-bullets, but I won't read every sub-bullet of information that I've kind of provided in here. So starting usually with something that's good, something that we need to work on, and then maybe some comparison to the state, basically. So for ASA ELA, the percent passing for all students in grades 3 through 8 is 71%. This is a 5-year increase over a 3-year period. Oops. Excuse me. And just to kind of show what I'm talking about here. So these numbers down here, that increase has been over those 3 years. All grades and subgroups passing, so all grades and subgroup passing rates improved or maintained when compared to the previous school year. With the exception of 5th grade, we do see a drop there. And then also students with disabilities. So down here, which were student with disabilities, one is a small one. The 5th grade one was a small one as well, but it is a drop. All others were higher. And then we have the comparison to the state overall, which you can see going across the board, we are higher than the state in all categories. I have here a 25 percentage points higher in every single grade level or higher.
So the state doesn't give us these subgroups of male, female, students with disabilities, et cetera, or do they?
They kind of do. Because of the way they display their data, they sometimes can't give a rate for certain subgroups just because you could almost extrapolate with other schools and things like that what that passing rate is, or you could, for the same reasons as I talked before, the anonymity of students could be compromised, basically. So it's spotty is the word I'm going to use here.
Okay.
What is income eligibility 1 and 2?
Those would be students who qualify for the
Free and
free and
reduced
reduced
lunch.
lunch programs. Yep.
Back to Eileen's question
real quick. I know it may not be aggregated on a statewide basis, but this is available to us for all schools in the state or districts in the state, correct?
Correct.
So we could cherry pick districts that we felt were comparable and pull together benchmarks that way.
Good.
I didn't hear your question. Can you repeat that? Kind of cherry pick what?
No, that we could look at other districts that we felt were similar to ours and then pull benchmarks for comparison.
Another issue, though, with the state level data, I think, I may be wrong, but they also include ACT in that lumping sometimes, depending on certain factors. And so then you're mixing ASA data with the separate assessment data as well. Okay, any other questions on this slide? Once we get through all the assessment, state achievement assessments, we'll kind of do a little bit more of an overview, but if you do have questions on individual slides with data, let me know. So then we do have this is the ELA ASA data for growth as well. And again, this is just kind of that breakdown, 50% of our letter grades for K-8 schools comes from this growth data. And this is measuring the percent of students who achieved average or high growth rates. If you recall, students who achieve average or high growth rates add to our growth score. If they get low growth, they actually, zero, they contribute nothing to that growth score. So seeing groups that have moved up or have a high growth score, especially if the proficiency score is low, it still gives us some benefit overall. One example I have here is our Black African American subgroup has a very high growth rate. Now again, that's a small subgroup in our district, but that would mean that that group is contributing points in that area, even if haven't all met the proficiency requirement yet. So the growth students in that growth subgroup are still contributing some way if they're having an average or high growth rate. Military was also another group that I think had a large jump from previous years. Then we did have a couple of groups drop. We had 5th grade, dropped a little bit. Students with disabilities dropped a little bit, and Asians dropped 1% as well. Otherwise, things were trending upwards, which is good. Okay. Then we move on to math. This is a table 4, so math proficiency. The first one we have on here is things that moved up. So our 8th graders moved up, military, Asian, and our Black and African American subgroup also moved up a considerable amount as well. So those are all groups that moved at least 5% or more. On the other end, we had our, going downwards, our limited English proficient students. So those are students who qualify for our ELO program, had a drop in that area. Otherwise, we do have, again, our scores are higher than the state average, in some cases almost double the state average, with a 23%, overall 23 percentage points at the low end of that.
And all but 2 of the grades declined, correct?
All but 2 of the grades declined, yes. And I did notice on my 6th reading of this document, there is a typo on the 3rd bullet on this page, which I'll correct in the future. That 3rd bullet is actually referring to the previous, the English version of the test instead.
And again, although it was a small drop, 5th grade in this category also, the scores fell. So is it, I assume you can drill down further into what school, but yeah. Okay.
Yes, we'll touch base on that at the end of the state achievement assessments piece.
If there's one.
And that's the specific work of our administrators,
Yes.
right? To look at their own, to do that work.
School data.
With Justin's help.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay, and so then we have the growth for the math as well. These are all in separate tables because it's a large amount of data at once ultimately. So very similar to the last one, the Black and African American subgroups also saw a very large increase overall, with 5th grade actually demonstrating the 2nd highest increase on there, jumping 12%. and I believe we said 5th grade dropped, if you saw on the previous slide, but their growth rates were actually higher. So when we see that, what that could mean is that our minimally proficient, partially proficient students are making progress, but overall are still not proficient, is what that could mean. Okay? Any questions on the ASA data that I presented so far? So moving on to our next state achievement assessment, which is AZ-SCI. Of course, recall that 2022, just like the other state achievement tests, is the first operational year of this assessment, so this is our only real 3 years of data for this assessment also. We see that the 2 or more racist subgroups maintained or improved, where are we going here? Wait, sorry. Oh no, sorry. Other than the 2 or more racist subgroup, all other subgroups maintained or improved their passing rate compared to the previous year. So in that case, this was the only one that went down. All others stayed the same or rose compared to the previous year. Grade 5 passing rates, did decrease, but maintained a higher rate than the state average and still higher than the 8th grade and the 11th grade subgroups, basically. Looking at the state comparison, our scores are over half, twice as much as the state averages. This is consistent with what it was last year, even though our scores have moved up, and I don't believe the state scores have moved up that much in comparison when I kind of took a glance at that. You might notice, though, that our 8th grade and 11th grade classes, like I mentioned, are lower than our 5th grade in here. There could be a couple of reasons for that overall. One is that since adopting these standards, the elementary schools kind of were the bigger ones to really take on these 3D science, standards basically, and it's moving through the process. It'll be interesting to see next year when these 5th graders that were back here take their 8th grade test, which they have not done yet. They're currently we have their 7th grade data. They're currently 8th graders this year, and we'll see if we notice a jump in the 8th grade scores as this group moves through the ranks. Okay.
I'm sorry, I think you prefaced your comments on AZ Science. There is no growth grade here.
Correct, there is no growth grade, and if you recall, in terms of the A through F letter grades, it really only applies for the bonus points, whether or not we had 95% tested, and if our averages were, I think it was 2 standard deviations above, or 1.5 standard deviations above the state average, where, with our scores, our percent passing being so much higher than the state average, we're far exceed that area, and we had all bonus points for that last year. Yeah. So, I mean, there's still room for improvement, of course, when we see a 54% passing rate, but we are trending upwards at least, and, considerably outpacing the state in this area.
Thank you.
So ACT Aspire is kind of a unicorn in all this, or kind of stands out, basically. There are no cut scores provided by the state for ACT Aspire. It's not used in the proficiency calculation, as we kind of discussed at our A through F letter grades piece. And because there's no cut scores provided by the state, there's no proficiency cutoffs, basically. So the data presented in the report for ACT Aspire is using some data that's provided to the students, basically, on their paper reports that they get back to them. So the ACT has its own readiness benchmarks, which are meant to basically predict how well a student will do, in the next test level, and then when we get to the actual ACT, those have readiness benchmarks to kind of predict their probability of success at a first level college class, basically, a 101 class. So I'm presenting that data in here in lieu of having proficiency data. It's still a type of proficiency, but not defined by the state, basically. So when instead of saying the student, percent passing, we're talking about percent meeting the benchmark instead. So that data is presented here. A couple different things on here. Our math scores did improve in a couple of areas: female, math, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, and two or more races, along with the white, as well as the all students category increased from the previous year here. So you can kind of see our different areas where our scores jumped up in that area. We did have anecdotally, I know we had a large focus group at the teachers at the high school were focusing on particular areas at 9th grade, knowing that our scores were not so great the previous year, and so that was a focus. We do see percent meeting the benchmarks in ELA in 2024 for females, males, and income-eligible students with disabilities. Hispanic, Latino, and white subgroups are all at a 3-year low. So while we saw a lot of math scores increase, a lot of our ELA scores for percent meeting the benchmark did decrease over that same time period. Not necessarily as much, but there are several that did decrease in that time frame. One thing that the ACT and ACT Aspire data you'll see provides us is not only do we get a comparison to the state, we also have a national comparison that we can use as well. A couple of things to take note of, though, when we're talking about the national data. Not a lot of places use ACT Aspire anymore. It's kind of a test that they're sunsetting. ACT is sunsetting.
Yep.
I think, from what I can tell, only Utah, Wisconsin, and Arkansas also use ACT Aspire in their state achievement testing. So when we're looking at the national data, we're probably comparing it to Arizona and those 3 other states for the most
This
part.
is an Arizona state requirement.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
For talk of changing that you know of?
No. I mean, I think Mr. Horn would like to bring back
High stakes testing.
the high stakes
Yeah, so-
testing.
What, sorry?
That's
Pardon
a
me?
test to graduate.
The test to graduate, he would like to bring that back, but there's no talk about
Reducing
reducing.
testing.
No.
I think the focus possibly for bringing in ACT Aspire is to give some sort of checkpoint between 8th grade
Right.
all the way to 11th grade. While it's not used for any proficiency calculation, it is tangentially used for the growth score calculation for the high school, because when it's looking at did they grow from their last assessment, the ACT growth score looks at how students performed on Aspire instead of going all the way back to 8th grade. Okay. Moving on to the ACT, we have a lot of data here. The top table, table 9 up here, is more about, this is more data that ACT provides, showing the actual average score for our students. All the areas are out of 36, with the writing test being out of 12 points instead. So if you notice, 7.6, whoa, that's because it's out of 12 instead of 36 in the case. So from here, we have a couple of things to note. CFSD's scores in all the subject areas, so I'm talking about table 9, increased compared to last year, with the exception of science, which was just slightly higher the previous year. Wait, did I have that right? With the exception of science, which was...
Actually, a little bit higher.
It's, yeah, there's,
I
no,
think I
it's
may have had-
reading.
It's-
Oh, no, it's not.
well, it's
English
increased
is the
over-
same.
Nothing went down.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just have.
Not on, yeah.
English stayed the same, but that's it.
All right, yeah. And you can see our average compared to the national averages. Our average scores are higher than the national in all areas. And it's important to consider what that score is when we're looking at the national score there. There are, of course, several states that do use the ACT as a state achievement test, which means that all their students in their state take this. But there's plenty of states that do not. And so when we have students taking this test on their own, they're typically the students who intend to do well. And so we could, expect that the national score in some cases might have that sort of extra bump from those students who are taking it on their own. So that's a factor to consider in there. Additionally, and it's stated on your actual document, where that national average is coming from. It's actually sort of an average of like 3 years worth of data. It's not, we're not looking at juniors from 2024 in the national data. We're looking at 3 cohorts prior data into that. They don't publish, as far as I can define, they don't publish state achievement data separately. So that's just giving at least some comparison, but it's not the same cohort of kids. Okay. So then on the proficiency piece, we do have the students with disabilities in ELA passing rates increased 14%. So we do see an increase here from there. So that subgroup did see a jump. We do see that the female passing rates in ELA, though, dropped 9% compared to the previous year. So here. This is kind of unique because if you look at all the other ELA tests for ASA and Aspire, females typically did better on the ALI section, males did better on the math section, and this is one case where the males have actually overtaken the females in this 1 year. And so no idea, same number of students. Well, you can see this is still the same number. We have 160 females who actually pass. So it's the same. It means that we actually have a higher number of females in this particular year as well, if that somehow adds into that. And then the passing rates for, of course, all our assessments are higher compared to the state with some exceptions. The students with disabilities in math is lower than the state, but that is a very small subgroup in this case, so that's not entirely surprising. One or two students can really shift that when you have a small subgroup to begin with. Okay. One quick point, I wanted to go back here. I had to see I wrote the note on this page, but not on the previous page. Going back to ACT Aspire, the STEM score on here, you'll see is pretty low. It sort of jumps down, and math and science are what make up the STEM score, so you might envision that those would be an average. However, that's not the case. When I first put in this data, I questioned this myself, why this was so off. And really it's because of how ACT sets their benchmarks. The score needed to achieve the benchmark in science is 430. For math, it's 428. So you might think the STEM benchmark is in the middle of that, 429, but it's actually 435. It's higher. So the STEM benchmark winds up actually being higher than either of these two tests, which accounts for that lower score. It's not just a straight average of those two numbers. So looking at ACT Aspire and ACT together, this is not a table in the report, but I thought I'd throw this in here. This is the first time, the first year that we really have a sort of comparison with how did students do when they took ACT Aspire compared to how did they do when they took the ACT. So our cohort 2025 took Aspire back in spring 2022. They took ACT last year, and ACT Aspire does give a predictive ACT score, and so that's listed here on this column, and then you can see the actual score that our students achieved on the ACT on the next column, and then the difference there. So in general, we did better than predicted, other than the math component where we didn't have much of a change at all. So I think that's pretty good overall.
So that's not the actual ACT Aspire score, it's their predictive
It's
score.
their predictive score, yes.
It's the prediction of what they will get on ACT.
Based on what they did on ACT Aspire.
Correct. Yeah, so, correct, yeah, because their scores on ACT Aspire in the 400 or 300s, 400s.
Yeah.
A scale score, but then the students each get their own report that says what their predictive ACT score is. The numbers here are like for really the high school. Here's the high school's predicted ACT score for your students overall. Okay. So this wraps up the statewide achievement testing component, and I thought I would really quickly touch base on what do we do with that at this point? Because what I've been describing before is just, and what's in the report is just facts. Here's the numbers, here's what went up, what went down, what do we do with that information? So something that's not listed in this report, other data points that are not listed in this report, are several reporting categories. We, of course, can say, oh yes, the high school is not doing what we'd like, in terms of their math score is not where we want it to be. Okay, math teachers, fix your math score. That's not enough information. So what we're focusing on doing is making sure that our schools and teachers, we'll talk about that in a moment, know what were the actual performance areas on these tests where students were most efficient. And so showing on the screen right now are what those reporting categories are that don't come from the state level so much, but when we do test on our testing platform, we can download that data and see how students performed in these individual reporting categories. So the state doesn't report out on this data. We have to dig into it and find it ourselves, basically. And so, there are different numbers of them across the board for the different grade levels. And so what we have done then is given some of this information to site principals. Our principals, one of their focuses is, sure, we have this data, we know our fifth graders are not where they want to be this year, but who are the kids that are pulling us down? That's always the important question. If they're going from fourth grade to fifth grade and there is a drop in the fourth grade, when they're fifth graders, they need to know who those students are. So we focus with administrators early on this year with giving them access to reports where they could drill down to the actual students, see who are my minimally proficient students, who had low growth, so then they can start doing interventions with them. I know different schools had different approaches to that. Some of them use that as a focus for their CIT, the collaborative inquiry teams. Others used it I know the high school used it for Math Lab. They identify those students pretty quick so they could start targeting those kids for pulling into their Math Lab program. So that's one way that schools as a whole are using that data. One way that teachers are using this data, so this is something that we worked on this year, is getting teachers access to the data of their students on how they performed. And I'm not showing real student names on here. Those are TV and film characters on there, but the data looks the same. I can see Dr. Bartlett having a little panic attack there for a second.
When I saw Lizzie McGuire, I knew.
So you can see sort of on the right over here, these are some reporting categories for this particular grade level. And so teachers were given a report that showed how did their students do last year, so the students that they actually served in the previous school year, so they can see what was my group of students' proficiency rate, how did they do on growth, and where were they struggling. As a teacher, I could go and look, I have more below mastery in this particular category. Operations, outbreak, thinking, and numbers is something that we need to be working on more in my class so that we're preparing that next group when they take the assessment to do better on that particular piece, which might bring up their overall proficiency score. Likewise, not only were teachers given a sheet like this for the students they had the previous year, if they have students this year, so for instance, I'm a fourth grade teacher, I got a report of how my students did my rising fourth graders did. So early on in the year, I can quickly identify who my weaker students are, who needs those interventions, what is my class coming in deficient with, so they can make those adjustments as, do those interventions early on. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack. They can work on the kids early on, and they can also adjust their curriculum compared, looking at how things went the previous year. So teachers in math, science, ELA, additionally social studies. Most principals at the middle and high school levels asked that their social studies teachers had ELA data as well, believing that tied in. They provided this data. We made lists like this for Math Lab, so the Math Lab teachers had, again, individual names to see more details on what students were deficient in. We also had our SPED and ELD teachers wanted data for math and math and ELA. So they could, because that typically, ELD and SPED students typically tend to perform lower in terms of proficiency, and the goal is, of course, they now know exactly what skill areas that those students need assistance in. While they may not get them to proficient, they can at least start moving them towards growth in those areas. So there's a large attack going on multiple sides so that teachers have hands on this data so they can see exactly who needs to be worked with overall. So that getting down to the who is the student is a big factor in that.
I would imagine, though, that most teachers don't need to have the piece of paper in front of them. I mean, they know they're students, so that,
Well, that's true.
Not the income, but if you're, if you're in, maybe not in high school because it's too big and everybody's everywhere, but I would imagine at least in the elementary system, the 4th grade teacher is going to talk to the 5th grade teacher.
To a degree, yes. However, when I presented teachers with their data at one elementary school, 2 of them did come up to me and said, "This is awesome because we're in week 4 and we've only given so many assessments so far. We don't need to do 2 or 3 assessments to at least have some understanding of who these kids are." But yes, teachers, of course, do those things as well, which is always encouraged. Okay. So let me see if I had anything else. So I did say CIT work, sometimes is now being developed around this sort of data as well. As we're looking at our deficiencies, as we look at each grade level, we of course work towards making improvements, but we can't try hitting every subgroup at once. That usually doesn't work. But our principals are, trying to identify what those subgroups are. So I'm going to pause here before we move on to the rest of the report. Any questions on state achievement testing?
No questions on the testing itself, but going back to, excuse me, excuse me, going back to arming the teachers and principals with data, are you finding that there's enough understanding of how to interpret the data and how to use it, or are you having, for example, to hold like working sessions to help up level their ability to understand and interpret the data? What are your thoughts there?
So
Either of you.
I'll start. We are going through, similar to what I conducted with you all, with our principals, we are giving them a similar lesson on the A through F accountability system so they understand how these scores are actually calculated. We're going a little bit deeper than the level we went with you all. So ADE provides a portal for administrators to go in and look at the data. It's in the platform that directly gets uploaded to the A through F accountability system for their school. So they can see individual numbers, see where those subgroups are. They can look at that data for their school. In addition to other reports that, like I've given them, where they can look at their students as well, where the AD Connect portal does not give them the student information. So we're trying to upskill sort of their ability to understand how these things calculate and look for what might be what area might give them the most bang for your buck, as it were, to focus on this year, even though there's lots of different things they could be working on.
But then he's also working with working groups too. So he's going out to the sites as well. So assisting principals in presenting this data to their teachers and allowing them to work with the data in a hands-on approach as well. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. We're training our principals, and then we're working alongside them with their teachers to bring this data to them.
And then are you bringing together, for example, your entire math department, for example, and looking at it more horizontally, so to speak, across all of the schools? And, what do we need to, so what I really liked was on your previous slide, Justin, where you said, looking at my students from last year, right, here are sort of gaps, so to speak. So this is what I need to do to address my curriculum, gaps potentially that we need to fill in our curriculum this year. I would think that would also be beneficial looking across the whole of the math team, for example, or the whole of the ELA team, for example, to look at how are we addressing gaps as students progress through.
And that's where
entire
those scoring
pathway.
categories come in, specific to the scoring categories. So the algebraic, so we can find a strand of algebraic
Yeah.
thinking that is low, yes.
Yep.
Those strands are very important for that work, yes.
And in my presenting to individual schools, one of the amazing things, like once, it's like present, meeting over, you'd see different subject area groups all find each other. They sit down, they suddenly just show each other all their data and go, what group was, what reporting category were you low in? Because they were trying to identify very quickly in that, 30 seconds after the meeting, maybe what they need to start talking about as a team, basically. So it may not be site to site at that point, but within sites, those conversations are happening.
I had a question. I noticed something that jumped out at me is the 5th grade cohort on the AASA metrics and results.
Math or ELA, or both?
Both.
Okay.
The only time that it went up was growth for mathematics, but for the other scores, they went down. Is there something going on with that cohort? Is there, is there some bigger picture or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, were they first graders?
Yeah, during COVID.
I'm mapping in my head, obviously. Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it makes a difference.
I just wanted to ask that question.
I kind of have a related question to that. One of the bigger trends across a lot of these, and this is excellent, I love seeing all this in one place. This is great work.
Such a data geek.
I so am. Is there seems to be a pretty consistent trend of proficiency scores dropping as kids get older. And it's not unique to us, it's also at the state level. And it may be too big a question to answer, but have you seen any research, have you seen anything that gives indications as to why that might be bigger picture?
I have not. I would say if, especially if it's, what you were noticing for us is being mirrored from the state, there's something going outside of us that we can't necessarily see ultimately. Right. Especially when we look at things like, we can't really look at things like what's on these assessments generally. We can't dig down and look at the actual assessment question. We can get sample items, we can get, but we can't look at the questions themselves to get an idea of, are these exactly the types of things that we're working on in the classroom or not? It's really hard to say.
I think also maybe, I'm making a conjecture, as students, if they're not proficient when they test in 3rd grade, and they don't have those skills, and then they go on to 4th grade, and they may not have caught up on those skills, and they're tested again, so that's going to compound over time, right? So that's why it's really important to look at those scoring categories and find those students who are not, so that we can't, doesn't time they're in 8th grade, and we know in 3rd grade.
And the other thing I would say is there's also a big difference between we're looking at AASA data, which is a content specific for that year, versus the ACT exam, which is an actual college entrance exam. So there's definitely some differences in the types of exams, so it's really hard to compare, from 3rd grade on, as the tests change.
3rd through 8th we can.
Yeah.
But
So then going back to my question, the fact that in math for 5th grade, it increased for growth so much more over the year prior is an encouraging sign that you're catching up.
yeah,
Yes.
the growth is very important for us. I mean, obviously, we want proficiency as
Right.
well. We want
I
the
just
growth
want
to
make
get
sure
to
that it's
proficiency.
pointed out that they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with growth, if you have kids that jump more than one proficiency level, so they were in minimally proficient and went all the way to proficient and skipped that middle ground, you get more points. So we could have had kids that actually jumped more levels, which can contribute to a higher growth score as well.
Yeah, and it's sort of delicate balance where we do want to move students towards proficiency, so we want those high growth rates. But once they get to proficiency, we still want them to keep growing, because if they get to proficiency but they stop growing, they gained points over here, they lost points over here. We traded one problem for another. We need them to do both, is the ultimate goal.
So given that these are
just a certain type of test and not the only type of test that we're assessing our students on. We talk about that all the time. Right? How much weight, I mean, setting aside the A through F letter score and how that affects us financially and all that kind of stuff, in terms of just understanding our students and their academic needs, how much weight do we place in these specific tests versus our own testing?
Yeah,
or
well,
additional,
you know, one thing to look at is it's at least one standardized test that's being given the same across all sites
yes.
and all grade levels, and something that we can use as a comparison point with other schools, other things like that. But in total agreement, yes, this is one test, and it's probably a different format test than many of our students are used to taking. Most of our students are not taking multiple choice exams day to day in classrooms because they just, you know, our teachers don't feel that those are effective ways of asking higher order questions in general. So it's, you know, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, you know, is a format change part of the problem as well? You know, and that can be a confounding factor, but it is one checkpoint, but it's a consistent checkpoint at least, if nothing else.
It's not influenced by a teacher's grades.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, this
Right.
is a,
It's more objective.
yes.
Yeah.
It's probably more, and it's just a checkpoint, right? I mean, we get these at the end, and they take them at the end of the year. We don't get it till the beginning of the next year. So it's, you know, it's in arrears that we look at it, but it still gives us information. Again, where is our curriculum issues? Is it a curriculum issue? Or is it that the student just didn't get it the way we taught it?
Right.
So it does give us information.
Well, and I forgot what I was going to say. Similarly, you know, if someone were only looking at this information, regardless of whether our students may be performing better than the state average, better than the national average, if the passing rates are still in the 40s, 50s, or 60%, that looks pretty awful, but may not tell the complete story. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And so, okay, because that's been, you know, that's been a criticism. You know, what are you so proud of? 40%, 50%. But if that's based only on this kind of number, then that's not really I don't know.
It's one data point.
It's one data point.
Yeah. And, you know, with any data, when we're trying to determine how we're doing, I mean, we can always look at how we did compared to previously.
Right.
But beyond that, the only other major comparison point that we can make, at least in a reasonable public sense, is to something like the state. We could, of course, look at how other schools are doing. I don't know if that's necessarily something we put in a report, but we could, I know the high school frequently looks at, you know, how did this school do on the AZ side? How did this school do on the AZ side? You know, those are things they certainly look at. And that informs you if you're, you know, doing well comparatively or not. You know, it's something that uses a data point for sure.
And incidentally, I have done a little bit of that, and we do stack up very well to the best districts in the state. So not looking at the average, but looking at the top 2 or 3 unified school districts in the state. We're at the top or near the very top on those metrics.
So, if we're done with state achievement assessments, we'll move on to the next piece, which is some tests external exams that we offer that are not state achievement assessments. This is something that I don't believe has been in the assessment report before, but I've decided to add it in here because it still does tie into our A through F letter grade system, if nothing else. For the high school in particular, with the college and career readiness indicator, you know, students taking these other exams that are listed here help impact that indicator. So that's, to a degree, how these can, PSAT not directly, but informs the SAT later on that students will take. So they add to that overall. And it's something that we advertise and offer, and we should, you know, be looking at how our students do on those. So the first one on here is the PSAT. Table 11 shows mostly data on the student's overall score and then how many students took these exams. with table 12 and 13 showing more of a proficiency, but meeting College Board's benchmarks basically for these exams. A couple things on here: the female, male, Asian, and 2 or more racist subgroups increased their overall scores from 2023 to 2024. Male scores wound up being higher than the female scores in both subject areas, I believe, this time around. Yep. We do have the comparison to the state and the national averages. Similar, or national scores, and percent mean the benchmark. Similar to the ACT, we do need to keep in mind who might be taking these. Some school districts require all their students to take the PSAT. Others, many other places, it's a voluntary thing that students are taking completely on. Well, going to another district, their district doesn't offer the PSAT. So it's hard to exactly compare an apples to apples here, but it's, to give you some sort of data point. We have close to 300 or so students taking these exams, which is about 100 students shy of taking a state achievement test in our district. We have our 10th and 11th grade take it. About twice as many 11th graders take it as the 10th graders do in our district. And that might also facilitate why you see over here on the left, why the 10th graders score is higher in our district compared to the 11th grade score. Anecdotally, as the former PSAT test coordinator for the high school, it tends to be our brightest students who are taking the PSAT at the 10th grade level. Oftentimes it's our students who are already in a math level above the standard level path, and then they're either taking it again in their 11th grade year, or they're taking the SAT instead on their 11th grade year. So that, if we were to test all 10th graders and all 11th graders, we would probably see numbers closer to what the global, or more in line with each other compared to the global and the Arizona state averages, not this large discrepancy there. Any questions on PSAT before? So the next one we have is the STAMP assessment, which is an acronym. It's not the greatest acronym. It's Standards-Based Measurements of Proficiency. The STAMP assessment is what we use as our qualifying test for the non-English portion of the biliteracy component for the seal of biliteracy. So students have the opportunity to take a 4-subject area test on a subject, 4 components of speaking, writing, listening, and reading in their particular subject area. And this is showing basically on the left side the numbers of students who are taking these exams each year over time. You can see we're jumping by about an extra 30 kids each year for the last 3 years. We're growing the program basically. While it might not look like the program is growing when you look at the number of students who actually earned the seal of biliteracy, recall that the data you see on the right is the actual graduating cohort, whereas you see this jump in 94 students, or another extra 30 students last year that took this. Those are probably juniors, and we won't see them show up on the list until cohort 2025 graduates. So it's kind of a rolling, the right table is delayed compared to the left table is what to see from there. We do have students taken in a lot of different areas. You can see our Chinese language students have made a huge leap. This is largely in part to advertising by the teacher in that classroom, this opportunity to their students. And the same is true for our Spanish language classes as well. They continue to advertise this as well. I typically went into these classrooms and we told students about this opportunity so they knew it existed. We also find that a large number, I don't know how much is large, but at least 10% of the students who tend to take these exams, the language that they're taking the exam in is their first language. So they have to, again, STAMP is a component of the Seal of Biliteracy. They still have to demonstrate their English proficiency another way, and that's described on page 21, what that sort of looks like. And that's typically taken from passing their ELA courses and then reaching a high enough score on a state achievement test in the English, the ELA subject area on that test. So we have several English speakers taking these tests, but then also native speakers for these languages as well.
For tests that are optional, like the PSAT, SAT, STAMP, AP exams, I assume there's a fee associated with each one of those. Is there any kind of underwriting or financial assistance that the district offers for those to encourage our students to take those tests?
So students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, the exam fees for all 3 of these exams I'm describing in this report are waived for those.
But no other type of underwriting?
Not that I'm aware of. So lastly, and the one that's maybe too hard to read from a distance, is our AP exams, partially because there are so many of them that we offer in our district. So a couple of things on here. You can see at the bottom here that CFSD's average of students getting a 3 or higher on these AP exams, and that's out of 5, is at a 5-year, or sorry, really it's a 5-year high, because I do have that listed over here as well, this data there. You might wonder, just for clarity, why this number is not the same as this number, and the wording is very particular here. This is the percent of AP students with a score of 3 or higher. The number in the bottom right on the screen is the percentage of exams with a score of 3 or higher, which coincidentally are close to each other there, but they're not measuring the exact same thing. So not only are our exam scores at a 3-year high, but the percentage of our students who have taken these exams that have a 3 or higher is at a 5-year high. World history stats and micro exams had their 3+ score rate drop compared to from the year prior. Otherwise, I think most of them had increased. And with the exception of the microeconomics exam, all CFSD spring 2024 exams that we can display data for had a rate of students achieving a score of 3 or higher that's higher than the Arizona and global rates, basically. So we're doing better than the numbers on the right in general there.
Do you also track the numbers for 4 or higher, since so many universities, that 4 is the entrance number?
So yes,
okay.
We do. We have some separate, it's usually not not 3 years at a time, but we do. Normally at the high school, we've presented this data to the site council there, and it will show the numbers of 4s and some 5s and stuff. But then we start getting to that area where we can't show some data sometimes because we're running into too smaller, but that is on there. You can see from the table on the left, our AP program is growing. We're jumping up by 150-ish students from this year to this year. Then not so much the next year, but the exams, you'll notice, despite not having more AP students, our exams jumped by about 200 exams. I can tell you right now what our numbers are for this school year. They're not finalized because, of course, they haven't taken the exam yet, and there's, registrations can still go up and down. But we're at about 800 total unique AP students right now, and that's about 1,400 exams for this year that we're in right now. So a couple of other things on here. You can see that many of our AP exam programs are growing in terms of the number of test takers. Chinese language and culture is the first time we can even report any data on it because they are now jumped up to at least 13 students who took the exam. Our music theory was just shy. We had 11 students registered and only 9 took it, so I can't share any data on that. But that program is continuing to grow in terms of number of students taking that overall. You might notice down here at the bottom that the United States history one, compared to the previous year, jumped by a lot. And And that's not because more students want to take AP US History. There is a functional reason behind that. That comes down to some revision work that we had for social studies the last couple of years, where on the left we have our previous pathway for social studies. The right is our new pathway. And it was a rollout starting with cohort 2026. So what the situation is last year, cohort 2025 was taking AP US History as well as cohort 2026 at a different time frame. So this is replacing the AP Euro, which was also a largely attended exam as well on that time frame. So that's where that data is coming from. Where our increase is happening is in a couple new areas. For instance, pre-calculus is a brand new exam last year that we adopted, and this was partially because this is, for many students, the only math AP exam often that they could take. If they started with Algebra 1, they would get to pre-calculus by their senior year. So this was being offered to work with those students. Another reason for a large jump, not necessarily from last year, but just in the AP program in general, is a freshman offering of AP World History starting in spring 2023, and last year was another opportunity for students.
Did I hear correctly that this year you have 800 unique students?
Correct.
So that's almost 50% of our high school enrollment, isn't it? I mean, that's remarkable.
It is remarkable.
Isn't it?
So half of the high school students are taking at least one AP class.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find that our teachers towards May start interviewing their classes to say, okay, what day are you going to be gone for your test? Because some days, especially when you look at something like AP US History last year, 300 something students is again close to a state achievement test. That's an entire house's worth of students testing at one time.
I just think that's commendable.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did look at, I don't remember where I found it, otherwise I'd bring it in here, but the percentage of our students compared to our total population, like the percentage of our students that take an AP exam is really high compared to other schools in the state. Not a lot of other schools in the state have that same.
Yeah. Or even just the AP class itself. I mean, I'm more personally about the class than the exam.
Right.
It's commendable. I love it.
One question, you called this out, the microeconomics being kind of an outlier in terms of performance. So does that, I assume that gets shared back?
Yeah,
we'll
so
dig into why.
correct. So AP teachers will look at this data July 16th, whatever day it releases. Students are looking at this data at the exact same time, and they're constantly making adjustments, looking at the why of this. Microeconomics, and there could be more to this as well, but one factor to consider with microeconomics, and same with AP government, these senior level exams, the number of students who take those exams compared to the number of students actually enrolled in that class is a lot lower. One of the reasons for that is, in some cases, especially like the government class, many schools will take either the credit from AP US History or AP Gov. If students already took AP US History, why should I take AP Government exam? I can't, it doesn't gain me anything. And so
It's the same thing with English too.
correct. You'll know. Yeah, AP Lit has a much higher number, or much lower percent, number of students who are taking that because they don't need it, and they're doing the mental math, and they're already paying for 3 other exams. So they're prioritizing. The kids are doing these calculations.
From personal
And families.
experience. Their parents.
Yeah,
From
and
personal
families.
experience, for sure. My first son took, I think, 6 AP exams junior year.
Yes.
And then 2 senior year.
Mine too.
So he did the calculations. Well, these are the only 2 that would still give benefit to me.
So, yes, my daughter created a whole spreadsheet that showed what applied to what and narrowed in, and I highly recommend any AP student do that, so you know what you need to really
I dare
focus
say
on.
every AP student does that. That's why they are interested.
Yeah.
So similar to the PSAT numbers, it's hard to know what the true proficiency of our students in these subject areas are sometimes when we have these other factors that go into who's really taking the exam at the end of the day. We of course have assessments in class that are a lot of times aligned, many teachers do practice exams in the class that are given to them by College Board, and they're kind of grading on rubrics from that to get, gain senses. But who takes the exam is sometimes not to the benefit of the teacher. Ultimately, they can't necessarily choose that.
So I have a question, if I may. First of all, this is great. Always appreciate it. Thank you. Second of all, are we seeing any, are you seeing any trends starting to emerge in terms of colleges asking for the actual AP exam versus asking for the students to take the class? And the reason I'm asking is from personal experience, one of my children has gotten college credit by taking the AP class and not having to sit the exam. And I'm wondering if that is an emerging trend, or if it's because he's chosen to go to a specialist type of college. Thoughts on that?
Heard that.
I haven't heard that. Or I'm sure high school counselors would be much more attuned to if that's true or not.
I mean, I'm not asking for personal reasons. I'm asking because, if that is something happening, that might be something to factor into, what students are identified to take these classes, the value of taking an AP class, in terms of ongoing college credit. So that's the reason I'm asking, because it may broaden the pool.
We're seeing a lot of, my former place of employment, we definitely had a lot of colleges that were highly interested in the grade for the AP course, and oftentimes dual enrollment was coupled with that. So it's a sure thing when you're doing a dual enrollment class, whereas with the assessment, you've got to score. Our kids, of course, are scoring, which is phenomenal. But yes, there are colleges that are, I don't know if it's the U of A that's looking at those things, but some of the private colleges and smaller colleges for sure.
Yeah. It might just be something to look into a little bit. It might make some
Entice some kids.
Yeah, it might entice some kids.
Maybe it's a trend line as more students take more of the tests and stuff. They're looking for other ways to pull from a pool.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, potentially.
If you have half your student body enrolled in AP classes, you need to further pull out who are the really qualified students for XYZ university.
These scores are truly amazing for
They are,
this
that's
AP
fantastic.
assessment. That's a national assessment. I mean, it's really impressive. So we're doing great work.
And one thing that the high school's been doing the last couple of years in terms of these assessments, where the students are choosing to sign up for them, is a lot more advertising that these opportunities exist for both, or for the PSAT, STAMP, and the AP exams. The TVs in the houses are displaying information for these, and it's going in newsletters for the monthly Falcon News. These things are going out consistently. If students are not aware, then we're not paying attention. All right. If there are no other
Any
questions.
other questions for Justin, Tom? You want to review?
I think I've done enough. This is fantastic.
But I think you going into the classrooms and talking about the stamp thing has also been really impactful, because that put it on my child's radar for sure. She probably would have just soldiered on through Spanish. It's like, now I can take a test, I can prove something. So I think outreach like that to students directly is really great too.
Yeah, and that one is an important factor in terms of, when we talked about before the College and Career Readiness Indicator, we talked about there were college points and there were career points. And most of our students get half a career point from doing the FAFSA, but if they're not in a CTE program, they're not getting a full career point. If they do the STAMP, that can count as one of those career points, basically. So it's getting another opportunity to really maximize the points that we can potentially earn on that indicator as well, more that take it. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so
Great
much.
presentation.
welcome.
Thank you for taking the time. I know it's the end of a long day for you. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, sharing it with us, entertaining all of our questions. I'm sure there may be more
That's okay.
at a later time. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
I want to know, does your title fit on your business card?
No, it does not.
It's got a funky abbreviation, like the stamp abbreviation.
Like day one, I got a phone call and someone said, "What's your title?" And I had to go shorten it somehow on the phone.
Did you?
up with a cool acronym for it.
This business card is a index card.
Really big.
Do we use index cards anymore? Really?
Rarely.
Index cards or business cards?
Index cards, or are they antiquated?
Business cards.
Yeah?
My kids all use index cards. Of course, my kids are old now.
Yeah.
Yours is
Okay.
the youngest.
Item 7.2 is Arizona Legislative and Governmental Activity. It's a standing item on our agenda in the event we choose to discuss things like that we anticipate maybe coming down the pipeline and budget, that sort of thing.
We're holding our breath for 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
What's the timing on that?
Like we said, I think at our Bolts training, they said that they probably cannot get it onto the ballot for May. So it looks like August or November.
Oh, jeez.
Mhm.
We're all the way to November.
Wow.
Wow.
But
I'm still
that
really
will
unclear
impact-
on
it will
what
still be
happens
funded
if
out of the
it
general
makes it to the
fund,
ballot
so-
and it
It'll be
doesn't.
funded
In the
from-
meantime.
Meantime, we'll still get the general
Yeah.
funding, but
The
yes,
General
the
fund.
general fund needs to be.
yes, it is late.
Very. So
Yeah.
it will behoove, I think, well, the governor's office is well behind it and wants to
Yes.
increase
Right,
the
it'll
funding.
behoove us all.
It would behoove the legislature to get behind this and throw their power, which is considerable, to lobby for this. You know, letting their constituents know that they support it. And the fact that the dire predictions of what might happen to the trust did not happen. And obviously, past performance is not a predictor of future performance, but it's a data point that people can look at and say the worst did not happen, and money's sorely needed. And that's so yeah, you can only hope.
That, and then the aggregate expenditure
Limit.
limit, that's always, I mean, we're fine for this year, but again, years to come. And then, it was the, voucher, the ESAs, and her proposal for the income threshold. She has proposed an income threshold.
Which would
for-
only really save a modest amount
Yes,
of that
it's-
huge hit to the
Yeah, it's
general
not a big-
fund. I don't know how anybody could really argue. No, it's like 150 million out of 850 million. So I mean, it's
not a big
real
I'm
money.
thinking the income threshold was fairly high.
It
It
was,
was, it was 200,
but-
something like $200,000. So it wasn't like, it wasn't cutting out a ton of people. You would think that our state legislature could get behind some fiscal conservativeness, but
Other than that,
I mean, that's what we have to work with right now, is what the governor's recommendations have been, and we haven't really
Yes.
seen a lot yet. from
Not many
the
updates.
Legislature in terms of individual bills. And we'll keep watching.
Till January, but 100 days gets here fast.
It does.
It's the end of January, I can't believe it's the end of January.
Future agenda considerations? Agenda planning is Jacqueline and myself tomorrow.
Just a reminder that, for your meeting to discuss the, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank.
listen and learn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, it's on the
Really
agenda.
my mind.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that.
I don't
I
know
was
how
like,
I
just
read
a
your
reminder,
mind.
and now I can't remember what the number was.
I don't know how I did it, but
Okay. If there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
I'll second.
There's been a motion to adjourn and a second. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Did you say?
I did say aye.
Here. Motion carries 5-0. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Well done. It was a really
That was
great
a
meeting.
lot of information.
Ooh.
Yeah, before you